Well, that's a lot different than the computer clock.
It's 2 or 3 minutes past.
Yeah, well, okay. Hi, everybody. Hope I have the sound set right here. Okay, you should have received a review outline study guide for the exam 1 from me in the emails. Everybody see that? Yeah, check your email. Okay, I think they sent that out Monday. I posted it early Monday and then I emailed it Monday night. So if you didn't see it, check your email. We will have a review session Friday at 5 o'clock. I just haven't heard back from the room scheduler as to what room it'll be in. So I'll let you know as soon as I hear. I'll probably find out today and send you another email and post it in the announcements on the Moodle page. I'm thinking it'll probably be the Erie Lecture Hall because it's combined this class and that class together. We got to have a big hall for it. Although I don't really expect, oh yeah, sorry for making too much noise out there. Yeah, I don't expect more than 100 people to show up usually. Okay, remind me next time I have to keep that door closed to not disturb people out there. Okay. So today and Friday, there'll be kind of no frills lectures where I just kind of hit the main points so I cover what I need to cover for the exam coming up on Monday. So I won't tell a lot of stories or analogies from outer space or anything like that. Although I thought that was kind of interesting. It was pretty appropriate. Anybody ever tell you that before? Did you ever think of it yet? That people from, okay, they're locked out now. All right. Oh yeah, that's okay, you know. I don't know why the door's acting like that. No, did you ever hear that before? That beings from other planets who don't build flying saucers and come here probably just like it at home? You know, anybody ever tell you that before? They like their planets. Nobody ever told you that, or you never thought of it on your own? Okay, well, there's something new for you. All right. There's something about contentment that you might want to take another look at there. So, okay, I'll wrap this up, and you know, I'll be going kind of fast. If you don't get to write everything down from these PowerPoints, remember they're on the Moodle page, and you can finish up there, or with the audio YouTube recording. So this first one that I started on Friday, oh, it seems like it was so long ago. Friday, well. Just as the beginning here of an illustration of this interacting with the world. Well, now it's Apple that wants to mess up my lectures. Okay, Apple. Take a hike, Apple. Okay, there you go. Yeah, you gotta watch that. You never know who's gonna pop up there. So we talked about interacting with the world in a way that you always are giving something back and helping to take care of it. You know, it's not like the idea, the concept that developed, I don't know, over the last century of wilderness as something where the humans don't touch it, you know. Keep the humans out of the wilderness and everything will be fine. Well, I'd say, yes, some humans, there are certain humans that I wouldn't want in the wilderness, but the thing in traditional native society is the people had a role to play along with all the other species in using the earth together, taking care of it, making sure it bounced back from whatever resources you gathered. And it was just fine. And they kept this steady state, sustainable way. This is one of them, the controlled burns. Different tribes did this. Woodlands, plains, different parts of the country, not everybody, but a lot of tribes did it. And it was a way of putting nutrients in the soil. And I think I'm just going to go to that list now and of benefits of controlled burns, so I don't repeat myself too much here. And if you did it in this very controlled, seasonal way, you did it when it was safe, and in areas where it was safe. Before the fall rainy season is a good time, at the end of harvest, in the spring when everything's still moist and you're preparing an area for gardening. That was another small scale controlled burn. And then, in the forest, it was used to keep down excessive fuel buildup of dead branches and whatnot, and overgrown brush, and help the trees. And then it also puts nutrients into the soil there when you do these burns. So first thing you see up there, this combined with the way that people traditionally gathered firewood in indigenous tribal societies. You didn't just go around cutting down trees to get your firewood. You took the wood that the guardians of those trees had already given you by breaking off branches in a windstorm, fallen trees, dead trees. The forest is full of these branches, especially in places where people don't gather this way. And it wasn't a big macho He-Man activity, some big guy with his super giant chainsaw cutting down the biggest tree that he saw. This is, the young people, women, grandmothers, teenage boys and girls would go out and gather sticks and branches that had fallen down, and you bring those back to the camp in bundles. It was a regular activity, and there's plenty of wood that way. Occasionally, people took parts off of live trees, and we'll get that when we look at making masks and baskets and things like that. But you never would cut down a whole live tree or encircle a cut all the way around it, the whole circumference, because that'll kill it too. So they would take what we in Western society call dead trees, dead wood, but people say that's alive, really. It's the bodies of or parts of a spirit that is a living tree that broke off. Okay, and so when you have these catastrophic wildfires, I'll just say, and one of the great benefits of this process is you not only kill many things on the surface, including trees, these very large old-growth trees that used to be all over North America. The explorers, all those people talked about trees 12, 15, 16 or more feet in diameter, so tall that the lowest branches were 50, 60 feet off the ground. And this is all kinds of species of trees, too. And they formed a canopy at the top of the forest where the branches touched. That's why they call them canopy forests. And when you did these controlled burns, you might singe a little bark, but nothing doesn't hurt anything. And when you don't do it and you get excessive fuel buildup in places you can go and see, or around here, the classic example is the national parks, where they had that humans hands-off idea, concept, as a way of taking care of the world, and it's not traditional for Native people. But I was in Yellowstone Park camping with my family when my kids were little, summer of '88, right before the fire started, the big burn, yeah. And I didn't start it, just in case anybody was wondering. Okay, it's the day we were leaving that we saw this smoke coming in. Actually, the day before, there's a little trickle of smoke coming up somewhere. Nobody even thought about it. And then the morning, next day is. But as I was driving around the park and walking around for the days before that, I said, this place is a tinderbox. Look at all of this wood that nobody's harvested and used. The fallen branches. I wasn't thinking of cutting down any trees. They were piled up all over the place. And the reason that we have places like that is when the non-native people moved in, especially government officials and priests and missionaries, when they saw native people doing these controlled burns, they panicked. This must be some kind of warfare, fire warfare. They're going to try to drive us out like our people, the Wampanoags, did way back in the early 1600s, after they just had enough of these English, and they started burning villages and telling them, go back to the ocean, you know. And so ever since then, there's been this great fear of Indians and fire. And so, but they didn't know. They didn't know that these were controlled burns. They weren't burning anybody's villages. They were helping the world to have this kind of breathing space in the woods. And you can see it also provided gifts for the deer and elk, all the grazing animals, you know, and then consequently those that preyed upon the deer and elk. You have greater access when you can actually see through the woods and see them out there and sneak up on them behind the trees and all that. Yeah. So it wasn't you this time. Somebody way back there. Okay. Dang it. I thought you were just kind of bursting into song because the lecture was so inspiring. You wanted to. Okay, never mind. Oh no, don't say that. All right. So when they banned it, you know, so they said, you Indians can't do that, you know, and right around the time that the reservations are created, 1850s, 60s, place to place, they started banning them from doing the fires, and it happened earlier in the East in some places. Then you get this fuel buildup, and you start getting these big out-of-control forest fires. Classic example, last little story. Okay, get those things under control. Okay, you really should have them off unless you're a medical service provider, an EMT or something like that. You know, or you got a kid in the hospital and you're on call or something. You don't need to have those on. And so 1910, you might have heard of the massive big burn in 1910. Yeah, you heard of it, Tom. Yeah, like we weren't there, you know, you and me. We just heard of it, right? Okay, now he's a kid compared to. Yeah, yeah, I might have been, but you know, let's not talk about tangents like time travel and out-of-body experiences or anything like that today. Okay, previous lives, nothing like that. We're not talking about it. Okay, it was a fire that spread all the way from western Montana into central Washington. In all of these places that the authorities had banned Native people from doing their controlled burns. The fuel built up in the woods. Just a little spark from one forest can travel through the air over a valley to another forest. There you go. And it was the whole western northwest was a tinderbox, and it was the biggest fire that we've ever seen in known history.
So it went from like the top of Logo all the way down through Thompson Falls and Ida.
Yeah. Well, it actually carried all the way into eastern Washington too. There were parts of that burnt. Yeah, so balance again. It comes back to that principle, you know. The world needs, the natural world needs every species to interact with the environment the way we were meant to interact. We all play roles and keep the balance of nature there. And so we come to the next one, and then we have to do one more after this. Okay, so in this economic life that's spiritually led and earth-centered economics, you have different concepts of time. And a lot of times I don't see, well, my native students, and I see this Indian time up there. I'm going to start talking about Indians being late for work and stuff like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really what you could also call natural time, the time that all first peoples used to live by, long before their clocks and watches and that kind of thing. And if I do this fast enough, I got a little funny story I can tell you about the first clocks coming into this area. Okay, and so natural time is determined by natural events: sunrise, sunset, position of the sun in the sky without putting a number on it or having labels for fixed positions, except for, you know, midday, morning, early day, you know, those kind of things. But you don't have to put a number or labels on it. And day and night, 13 months in a year, and that's a lunar calendar year. That's the year, the type of calendar that most first societies have always gone on, the lunar months, which are natural months. They're not an arbitrary number that you just pick out of thin air, but you go by cycles of the moon. They're 28-day cycles, roughly, and you have 13 of them in a calendar year, and that was a natural way of keeping time, measuring months and years. Seasons are natural, and the harvest seasons too, as well as the weather seasons. You have when your things that you live by, your crops that you gather, harvest, become ripe. That's a season. In many tribal societies, the months of the year are named after the natural fruit that comes right that month. Like the huckleberry month corresponds roughly to the end of July and most of August in our calendars, and bitterroot month for the Salish people who lived in this land here we're on right now. Most of the month of May, little overlap into June. Oh yeah, they do bells at 1/2 Okay, right. All right. So you know you have for Northwest people the salmon run month when the salmon are doing their spawning. So these natural events related to harvesting the goods that the earth has given you and that the species are giving you are ways of keeping time. Okay. Did I show you guys this before? Oh no, that was in another lecture I did during the winter break. We're going to see this everywhere we go. When we go to the regional overviews after this first exam, everywhere you go, people made big baskets. That's a big basket. And the little thing in her right hand there, this Pomo woman of California. It's not a seed beater, as the anthropologists labeled it. It's a, you can call it a scoop. They have a word in their own language, bush tapper. You're not, beating the bushes, whacking them. You go out to gather anything when it's really ripe, when it's ready to give itself to you. You could shake a branch and all the seeds or berries would just fall in your hand, That's when you go to gather. And so you use that little tapper, put your big basket under there, and you can get a lot of seeds or whatever the fruit is that you're gathering in a short time, And the thing I like to point out here about the big baskets, and we'll see this over and over again. You'll get tired of me talking about big baskets in a couple weeks, but there's a good point to it. If what the slanderous anthropologists and social Darwinists of the late 19th century who said all the tribal peoples are about to become extinct because the modern world's taken over and all that. And what they would say is that the traditional indigenous way of life is a life of constant struggle and a meager existence. And if it was a meager existence and you're going to go out one day to pick berries or amaranth or some kind of natural fruit, and you were just, I hope I find some today. I'll take my little tiny basket with me and maybe I could fill it up because I live such a meager, mere subsistence existence and I'm so miserable, as these anthropologists wanted people to believe in support of colonialism. They didn't make little tiny baskets for that. If you lived in the world of plenty, you'd go out in the season, spend a few days a week. You don't go out every day and take everything that's out there. You take what you need. You fill up your baskets. You fill up your storage baskets back in the village or the camp. You know when you have enough, and then you stop and let all the other species continue. And they'll stop when they have enough too, And the little ground squirrels and other beings, they have their little stashes underground. They have tunnels and little rooms. And if you dig it up, you see they've been keeping, like at my place, it's the filbert nuts. They like to take those and keep them in a little chamber underground. But they don't just keep building more and more chambers and panic, we'll never have enough. They're not consumer people of this society. And so that's important to realize that there was a world of plenty here. And even in the 1920s, when there'd been a lot of population come into California from the United States since the gold rush in California, there were still places you could go with your big baskets and fill them up. I don't know about nowadays. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, I gotta wrap this up. Last thing, and I like anthropology. You hear me criticize anthropologists. I'm talking mostly about the old school and some people that are still stuck there and haven't admitted that the old guys are wrong. But, there was this campaign, a slanderous campaign against indigenous people in academia and trying to paint the most negative picture of tribal life they could, and a lot of that has continued to this day in the modern times with the myths that people still believe. And one of them was they were always struggling and always working from sunup to sundown. Now, once the invaders came in and things became scarce, the buffalo was wiped out and different things happened, then you did have more of a labor-intensive life back east. Our lands were taken and we had to go work for the man. Then we were working all the time. You know, you're employed by one of these Englishmen. They don't, you know, have any limits to how many hours you had to work. But in the traditional society, and how do we know this? By the objective anthropologist who rejected that old assumption about the 1960s, late 50s, 60s, and 70s. You began to see people do field work with more remote indigenous peoples that were still had their land bases in places and hadn't been so touched by colonialism, and they watched their ancient life ways in their abundant resource time. They'd sit there, take field notes, watch them, and say, wow, these people sure take a lot of naps and play a lot of games. They don't seem to take work so seriously. And they're not starving. And they're pretty happy, and they sit around telling stories and joking a lot and laughing. What you can look this up yourself. I named a couple of them, I think, in the bibliography. Marshall Sullins, Richard Lee. I've become familiar now with a woman who did work in Africa with the Bush people, or the San and Hulsa people also, who knew how to find plenty in a desert environment. And they all say, you know, if you average out the busy times of gathering to the times where you have everything stored up for the year and you didn't have to work much at all, it averages out to 15 to 20 hours a week over the span of a year. Now, what would you do with a 15 to 20 hour work week in which you had everything you need? You could provide real well for your family, your extended family, nieces and nephews, all the people that live with you, and just had to work that much. What would you do? Maybe you'd play a few games. Maybe you'd spend more time artfully creating your tools and clothing and stuff. We'll look at the beautiful artistic productions beginning on Friday. Probably you'll have to see most of it next week. That's the way it always goes. I think I'm going to get it done on Friday or before the first exam. But you have more time to make your world beautiful and pleasant and all of that when you're not living a life that's involved with work all the time in a balanced, abundant, natural world. Okay, so that said, here's a principle to follow up there. Time to live and play when it's not time to work, and all of these other things you can do. Time for ceremonies and prayers, so you have time to engage in a real spiritual way of life too. So it's not all just fun and games, but you know, spiritual life is at the center of everything, of keeping your good relationship with the world, keeping it alive and all that. And then I close with a question that I don't answer, but it's just like food for thought. So we looked at cyclical time. When you look at natural time, you look at repeated seasons, annual seasons every year. It's a cycle, right? So time is a constant circle. You could look at it as spirals moving along, but is it also linear? That's the other thing. You know, in the Western society, you have a totally linear concept of time, and start and finish and that kind of thing, beginning, end, all of that. So just a little food for thought. Any questions before I go to the next topic? I am going to go there. But a little different, huh? Did you get some different perspectives here than anything you might have been used to in the past? It wasn't exactly the same story you heard in Economics 101, was it? Well, I hope so, you know, and so that's going to be good for now. We'll come back to some of these principles later, and I have to change slideshows here. Okay. And so here we go. Okay. So how do you manage? That's a popular question, isn't it? And how do you manage a society that's primary goal isn't pushing each other around and ruling over each other or ruling over nature, but actually working together cooperatively, harmoniously, and how do you get everybody to stay on board with that and not deviate into erroneous, unbalanced ways of life? Well, first thing is you live in small communities where everybody knew each other, and you're probably related to just about everybody in your community. And so there is this ability to see if somebody was ill, spiritually, mentally, going off balance, and bring them back and include them in everything. And that's part of another part of medicine. And so people who did that, and also people who were involved in decision making regarding, any kind of major new event or circumstance coming up, were called leaders, and there are different names for leaders in different languages. In Wampanoag, it's sachem, or squasachem for women leader. There are male and female leaders. Some tribes, mostly in the plains, they had more male leaders. In the southwest and northeast, you had kind of an equal number of female and male leaders. And in different societies, you have different ways of balancing everybody's roles. There's no sense that a leader is superior to anybody else. They're servants, like everybody else is, serving each other, serving the natural world, serving the future generations to come, keep giving them a good world that you could leave behind for them. And so representative councils, not monarchs, not emperors. And look at that first thing I meant to talk about. Just enough government that you need. If everybody's doing well, you're not having any kind of crisis or super conflicts or anything that you can't solve on your own on the small scale. You didn't need government watching over you all the time. They'd watch and they'd see how everybody was doing and check you out, say, hey, how's it going? That kind of thing. But they aren't, heavy-handed controlling everybody, What really controls people in this type of society is the values that you hear taught through the stories every winter during the storytelling time. You hear those from the time you're a little baby and all your life, and you see that everybody around you really believes and values these stories. It kind of sinks in. So it's a spiritual-based society where you have a limited role for leaders and councils of leaders, okay? They're called together at time of need. That's not like every day we go to council. Now we got the modern tribal governments. I'm going to talk about that later. It's quite a bit different than the old traditional ways, There's no money involved in the old times, or the idea that this is your job you go to every day. It's just part of who you are. And you do other things too if you're a leader. You don't just say, I'm a leader, I don't have to do that. I don't have to gather firewood, I don't have to go hunt or go fishing because I'm the leader. Everybody worked together. It wasn't like, being a leader is kind of a humbling role, because you had this greater responsibility of watching out for people. Just like all the elders had that to some degree, So public servants, not professional politicians. Remember that old principle, nothing to buy, nothing to sell. Decision making by something called consensus. There's a short definition for consensus there. It's a unanimous, or at least nearly unanimous agreement. I mean, where everybody can agree enough that they can move forward and keep going, you know, put aside differences. And these councils, one of them's described in your book there. There's a little article right next to these articles about government called A Picture of Respect. And it was one of the rare moments in the early colonial period where an Englishman was actually welcomed to observe a tribal council of the Shinnecock people on Long Island, New York, there. And so this guy, his name was Daniel Denton, and you see it in your book. And read that, because he'd never seen anything like this. Certainly not in the British Parliament, where they're all screaming and shouting each other down. If you don't believe me, go to C-SPAN on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. They do the British Parliament show. They're still like that. You know, nothing's changed. Okay. And Daniel Denton says, you know, he was amazed that only one person spoke at a time in the council. And the people traditionally believed, and you hear this in many different tribes, not just my own people say this, but we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, because it's twice as important to listen than to speak. And some of you might have heard that in your own upbringings and communities, you know, where at least they tell the kids that. When you're older, you can just be as blabby as you want and disrespectful. But anyway, you know, but it's an important principle that these leader figures carried with them into council. And you had a presiding officer, which the English often misinterpreted as, oh, he must be their king. I'm going to get to that when we get to colonialism. And his job was to recognize who had the floor and whose turn it was to speak. And Daniel Denton says, and the speaker, even if he goes on and makes ever so long of a pause, that's what he says, nobody interrupts him until he signifies or tells the people, that's all I've got to say. I'm finished. My speech is over. And, you know, how is it, you know, in other societies here, you know, you stop to cough or something, clear your throat, and people are jumping in and saying, okay, you know, or they'll shout right over you, you know, and all of that. So this was very important for the unity of the tribes. Unity was one of your keys to survival as a tribal society. So you didn't want animosity, you didn't want disrespect, people being dishonored and all of that. And you certainly didn't want revenge within a tribe and hard feelings. And so these meetings, when they were needed, you know, in a time of conflict or something that was a new situation you had to resolve, they were held very carefully, lots of prayer before, during, and after the meetings. And as you'll see when we get to some other examples later, if they come to an impasse, you know, where they can't agree and they can't form consensus, they would adjourn the meeting and say, everybody go back to your homes and pray for a few days, you know, and meditate or consider these issues, and then we'll come back and talk some more, you know. Now that was one of the many traditional ways of doing things. And then you come to this consensus, and you end up with a society and a group of leaders that's not divided by winners and losers, like when you have elections. And we'll look at how does one get to be a leader. Okay, that's coming up. Okay, I just have to keep going here. All right, so this is in your Moodle page, so you can read it all on your own. And here's some of the rules. Oh, there is that thing I was going to talk about. They're not chosen strictly on the basis of heredity. What became normal by the 19th century was not always normal in centuries before that. And this is a difficult one to really make a solid claim about. But the more we learn about traditional ways and the more information that gets dug up, it looks like it was much more common among tribal people to have to prove themselves to be a leader. Even if you were, say, the son of a chief, there was no automatic guarantee. Maybe the chief had several sons and they only pick the respectful, honorable one, or the most worthy. I was just taking another look at the two treaty councils in the plains at Fort Laramie in 1851 and 68. And there's an interesting observation at the biggest one in 51 that the American U.S. government agents told all the different tribes that are assembled there from all the plains tribes, you each need to designate one person as your head chief. And we'll have just a council with the one representative from each tribe. And they protested, especially the Lakota, louder than anybody. Says, we don't do it that way. We have a council of many chiefs, and we don't have kings and rulers or the great father in Washington type figure, the president who rules over all. And it was a big point of contention, and it really illustrated that this principle was pretty widespread, that you didn't have a lord over it all kind of person like you see in the Hollywood movies, where nobody will make a move unless the great chief says it's okay, John Wayne movie kind of image there. It's all made up. So I'll get as far as I can here, and so at least get some of the art slides and all of that on Friday. So purposes also included problem solving when you get in a difficult situation. A lot of this is common sense. The last thing I want to point out is the correction system. What if people did deviate and things went wrong? And I'll just put all of these up here. Like I said, it begins with the instilling of values from infancy on. Everybody listens to the stories. Everybody learns right from wrong, what's expected of them, what is honorable, what they'll be praised for, and what they'll be scolded for, and all of that. And very distinct taboos and moral and natural laws. Like I said back in the spirituality lecture, point number 4, definite rights and wrongs. And you learn this over and over again in illustrations and stories about the foolish, stingy kid who destroyed the whole village and caused people to get sick and starve. And these illustrations are really powerful. And so that's your first step, where you raise kids that don't want to go wrong. Now they experience a little freedom. There's this idea, let them learn on their own about certain things. But you bring them in when they're about to commit serious harm and they're going way off balance, And in that kind of society, a young person is really glad to be directed and taught, They want to live an honorable life. They don't want to bring shame to themselves or to their family. Another thing about young people at that teenage age, when people would get married at that age, teenagers. And there were a lot of arranged marriages in different societies. Families would get together and pick who's going to marry, And they wouldn't pick a person who was a slacker or lazy or a disrespectful person or a person who would bring shame. And so you wanted to show your best, especially at that time of your life, and all through your life, but especially then, if you had somebody who you were trying to impress her family or vice versa, she was trying to impress yours, you'd show you're a hard worker and respectful and you like to help out. You'd go help out the elders and her family and all of that kind of thing. So coming of age ceremonies instills those kind of values. When you are ready to become a man or a woman, you want to show your best. And when the whole society is honoring you at that ceremony, you want to be worthy of it, and that's a big important thing. Okay, that clock's fast. I believe it's fast. Okay, just want to finish this here. And so, there was scoldings, temporary cutting people off, for a minor disrespectful offense or something. People wouldn't talk to you for a few days. That was a one kind of punishment. If you did something a little more seriously, you might get whipping with a stick, and then a lecture or two. There were different levels, but these were kind of last resort punishments, and then for the most serious crimes, if a person went way off balance, ultimately you would be exiled away from the tribe, or there would be cases of capital punishment. I guess the last word I'll have to stop here, but is if there is a murderer in the tribe, it was in many societies left up to the family of the victim to determine the fate of the murderer. They didn't hire out to an executioner. The family would take care of that if they saw fit, or they would bring the person into their household as a servant, like a slave. That was another way to where the murderer makes up for the labor that the victim in the family, they've lost that helper, that hunter, that fisher, or net maker, or canoe carver, whatever that guy was that got murdered. Then this person has to take his place and fulfill those work roles. That's another way of dealing with it. Sometimes you can't do that, and that would be when execution was called for. But that's rare in traditional society. I'm out of time because that tyrant rules us all. We're not on natural time here. Okay. Hey, thank you. Good to see you again. Yeah.